So now we will continue, and I want to introduce my colleague in Norway, Bjørn K. Haugland, who is the CEO for Shift Business Climate Leaders, who will moderate the next session with the researchers. Please, Bjørn.
Thank you, and thank you for this nice keynote, kind of setting the frame for the discussion here today. So our panel will basically look into what we can learn from previous global crises to bring into the crisis we are into just now. And that means that we have collected 4 researchers which can enlighten us from different perspectives. So the proceedings will be that I will introduce you now for the panel, and I will then give the panelists a few minutes just to establish themselves and start to reflect on the overall theme of what we can learn from previous global crises into the crisis we're into now. And then we will have a follow-up with a panel discussion. And please, I encourage you to send questions in the chat if you have anything in particular you would like for us to bring up in the panel. So then it's a great honor for me to introduce you to Louise Simonsson. She is researcher for Swedish Defense Research Agency. The next panelist is Kristin Vallevik. She is the CEO for NORS, which is one of the biggest research institutes here in Norway. And then Bjørn Ola Linner. He is Professor Environmental Change, Center for Climate Science and Policy Research at Linköping University, and Director Mistra Geopolitics. And last but not least, Tomas Kåberger, Director, Research Professor, Energy Area of Advanced at Chalmers University in Gothenburg, and Executive Board Chair of Renewable Energy Institute in Tokyo. So here we have a lot of knowledge, insight, and just as a starter, I would like to start with you, Louise. Please tell us maybe a little bit, about your research and your initial perspective on what we can learn on the previous crisis, please. I cannot hear you, but maybe it's okay for the rest. No.
Is it better now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Sorry about that.
See you and hear you, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a very interesting topic and a very nice initiative. I spend most of my time at the Swedish Armed Forces headquarters as an operational analyst. So my perspective today on this topic is mainly coming from the military defense point of view. And the main concern now is that the climate change will worsen both the security risks, and at the same time, military conflicts are a significant driver of climate change in itself. Also, increased spending on the military often involves large emissions of CO2. So that will be my main point of view in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Kristin, will you continue from Norway and Bergen?
Yes. Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. Of course, the climate crisis is a true global crisis, and the question is how to deal with that. And it has been known for a long time. But it seems like something happened in 2019 where at least a lot of business leaders also really came on board on the true risk of the sustainability and the climate issue. And also it seemed like a lot of businesses came to the point that it's more than a pin and nice slides. It really has to be internalized. And also the fact that it's really a survival kit. Being aware and really being vocal on sustainability is crucial to remain competitive. So now, in general, it seems like there is really a push from behind, at least from the kind of a bandwagon effect from the business world. And also the fact that we really need to increase the speed, and that also a lot of business leaders now seem to be very impatient to get that started. But they really experience some limitations. So there is a push at the same time that it's really hard to fulfill some of the goals that you really want to do as a business leader. And also the push is really extrapolated from the BRAVE, I would say, EU strategy, both the Green Deal, the taxonomy, but also the ESG reporting system will kind of improve or actually push the development. So it's really not longer a nice to be aware of sustainability. It's really a need to be also to survive as a business. However, there are huge challenges around us and hindrances to ensure the green shift. And I would just like to mention a few of them, and I assume we get back to them. At least in part of the general public, I still believe there is a lack of sense of urgency. That it really the amount and the risk of sustainability or lack of sustainability and the climate changes, and also the regulatory framework is really lacking behind in all of the world, but also in the Nordic countries. And also, I think the democratic institutions are maybe not set up to really handle this speed. And of course, we should definitely remain our democracies and our democratic institutions, but maybe we need to set them up a bit different to handle the speed that's needed going forward. And also how we as democratic countries can deal with many dilemmas that we will experience. And I think that is maybe one of the biggest challenges now is how to handle all these dilemmas. Are we prepared to make these hard choices? Do we know how to actually do them without experiencing large conflicts? Also the social effect of the changes, but also the social accept. How do we deal with that? How to tackle conflicts? It will be difficult. Also, there will be room for more populistic parties, and that may challenge our democratic systems. And that may be difficult because we haven't been there before, and that's maybe we can't experience anything from the previous crisis because that is kind of a new setup. So, and also the fact that we need more energy at the same time as we need to learn how to reduce energy consumption in areas. So it's really to find that balance. And also that we may experience some kind of energy protectionism. And that may also create some disturbance and maybe also instability around us. And all of these elements are, of course, both enlarged and extrapolated by the war in Ukraine and also the geopolitical situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for lining up these both opportunities but dilemmas, and we will bring them with us in the dialogue. Then Björn Ola Linnar,
thank you.
Will you give us your initial reflections, please?
Yes, thanks. Yes, as introduced, I'm a director for Mr. Geopolitics, which is, to our knowledge, the largest research program outside the defense industry on how a changing geopolitical landscape shapes the conditions for sustainability and vice versa. So my reflections will be taking its inspiration from the work that we've done over 6 years now. And I think it is on top of what's said, and this I think ties in nicely to what Christine just said. Russia is not only using natural gas and oil to forward its geopolitical interest, but also weaponizing food. And I think that is something that we need to also keep our eyes on when we talk about the Nordic response, the supply chains. What we now see perhaps is the emergence of a new bipolar world. We're not there yet, but we can see the contours of that, where we can say something like that. We see one block where we see a transformation towards decarbonization, and one that remains in fossil fuel dependency. We see how both China and Russia are using their assets when it comes to natural resources in that way, and most recently, we can see it clearly when it comes to food and the weaponizing of food, which is a clear strategy from Kremlin. So I think that is the next crisis that we have to keep our eyes on and be prepared for. At the same time, as we address what was introduced here in the beginning of the Repower Europe. So we see in that context an urgent need for a new green diplomacy, where it's worrisome that we now cut back or at least put on hold climate finance for poorer countries and so on. That will reflect badly on the efforts to counter such bipolar world. I think we could safely say that cooperation would be the new realism, where self-interest is also reflected in that we need cooperation throughout the world and make sure that the EU is on top of the game there. Not really, even though the Green Deal includes Green Deal diplomacy, and I think it's some very good ideas spelled out there, but we haven't seen that prioritized just yet. And that is, of course, extremely important in a world where we have seen that the less than half of the world's population now live in a democracy of some sort. And I think it's only a little more than 6% live in full democracy, and about a third of the world population, more than a third of the world's population live in authoritarian rules, in states with authoritarian rule. So that said, then, if we need to go into green diplomacy, where we address the intertwined challenges and opportunities of addressing decarbonization, climate resilience, biodiversity, but also rule-based order, health, and human security, there are some examples from history, at least, that we can look at. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, Mark Twain is famously said. And for instance, we have the Point 4 program, all the efforts that were developed right after the Second World War as the Cold War emerged, on making sure that what was then called the affluence of the richer countries should go to all countries. Point 4 was the program that was initiated by Truman, for instance, to spread the welfare and the democracy of the US around the world. Of course, that has been heavily criticized, and he used the terms as undeveloped and so on. So, of course, it's not an example of what we should roll out now. On the contrary, there we can learn a lot of the insensitives of not thinking that the Western model is the only model that should be determined if life is good or not in societies. But the efforts to make a concerted effort in addressing environmental issues, even if that concept was not around then, but the natural resources, secure human security when it comes to health, to food and energy, at the same time as that was intertwined into securing democracies around the world. I think that is something that we need to think about along those lines today. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your reflection on this topic and also on the reminder of the green diplomacy, which is both a part of the EU Green Deal and maybe more important than ever actually going forward. So then, Tomas Kåberger, will you give us your initial reflections on the topic, please?
Yes, I will. I'm talking to you from Tokyo today, where I've spent the day speaking at other conferences about exactly the same topic. And I think most important observation is that the fossil fuel prices that have resulted from the Russian invasion in the Ukraine and the following conflicts is actually the closest to a global carbon tax that we've ever come to. The price effect, the cost effect for increased for using fossil fuels is now roughly the same as a global carbon tax would give. And that calls for accelerated energy efficiency efforts and accelerated deployment of renewable energy in order to keep demand low enough to make energy available to as many as possible in the world. And this is a common interest for the Asian countries and the European Union that are dependent on imported fossil fuels. Even if we do our best to deploy more renewables, and even if we are successful in improving energy efficiency, all of which is now extremely profitable because of these price levels, we will continue to use fossil fuels for several years to come. So as quickly as possible, succeeding with what President Biden is aiming at and what the EU Commission and the German government have clearly sketched that they are intending to achieve is very important for all of us in Europe and for other energy importing countries. So in a way, you could say the conflict in the Ukraine and the geopolitical development is horrible, and it may well end up with a global nuclear war, and we will have a tough time. But it may also be an opportunity to actually accelerate all the measures that we would like to see for climate policy reasons. We should do our best to avoid a global nuclear war, and we should do our best to deploy this technology as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So very interesting observation that for 30 years we have discussed this price on carbon, and suddenly this conflict in Ukraine and Putin is basically implemented that in a sense, at least the effect of that. So thank you so much. I would like to focus our discussion on you. Most of you have already touched it, but how will the ongoing climate transformation with this geopolitics we experience now, how will it change by this crisis? What can be accelerated and what is the negative effects? And so that is the initial question. And then definitely we will return back to the Nordic country. So, how will this and how can this strengthen the Nordic collaboration? But let's start with the climate transformation in this new geopolitical world. What is the changes we see on back of the crisis? So I would like to introduce Louise. If you would like to start, please.
Thank you. Speaking then from the military and defense sector, and what's going on there is that there has been quite a lot of European initiatives to reduce emissions from the defense sector. And as I said initially, now when that whole sector is growing, there will of course be much more emissions. And to transform the defense sector there are many advantages of doing that, but there are also some great challenges. To reduce the standard emissions, it's a much more straightforward procedure than to reduce the non-standard emissions. And by that, I mean to reduce emissions from defense buildings and day-to-day transport and such things that can be done, and especially then considering what's happening in the civilian sectors. But to decarbonize heavy weapon systems, such as fighter jets and tanks and warships and submarines, etc., require a considerable amount of fuel to operate. And by fuel, then I mean fossil fuel. And to transform that is a greater challenge. However, the high-tech innovations needed to accomplish such a shift to lower carbon alternatives could jumpstart the modernization and also be a contributor to the civilian sector and the global transformation.
So basically, you see that this kind of new world and the crisis might lead to accelerate the transformation in your sector.
If I look at it from the positive side, yes.
And if you should comment on the negative pathways.
Well, the problem, of course, if we look at how military operations are being done, there are lots of new other types of, if you look at the weapon systems now that can be used, such as drones, etc., that are not large emitters, but still that the war is now being in the Ukraine now with the Russian invasion. It's much more of a conventional type of war fighting. And we've talked a lot about hybrid wars in the last decades or so. And what we see now in the Ukraine is, of course, a hybrid war, but it also has a much, much larger conventional type than many expected. And with that comes also very large emissions. And then, of course, if we look at it globally, if the whole world is now increasing their defense sectors and their weapons, I fear that the emissions and the transformation might be not the first focus. And that is also what many previous crises, both man-made and military, as well as natural disasters, have shown us, that we always look at the immediate threats first and try to do as much as we can to avoid them. But then, in order to create a sustainable recovery, we need to think about the more longer term efforts that needs to be done also simultaneously. And that is very hard to prioritize in such a harsh reality that we're in now.
Thank you. I see, Tomas, you have raised your hand. So please, Tomas.
I think a very important aspect of this conflict with Russia is that Russia is the country in the world that is a superpower in old energy technology. They are dominating the export of gas and oil. They're large exporters of coal. Together with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they control 50% of the world's uranium mining. All nuclear reactors construction in the world after 2019 outside China are provided by Rosatom. They are extremely strong in the old energy technologies, and they are completely without any strategy on renewables. Unlike countries like the Middle Eastern countries that are now providing the cheapest solar electricity in the world, and the US and China, and even Norway is doing quite well in sustainable energy compared to Russia. So Russia is extremely vulnerable in relation to the development of an energy transition driven by renewable energy. And I think that's very important when you say now that this hybrid war is not so important. I think the hybrid war is now more important than ever, and the Russian interest in delaying and downplaying the opportunities of low-cost renewable electricity is extremely intensive. And you can just look at what Putin says and then imagine that all his social media actors are presenting similar attempts to confuse and create conflicts regarding energy policy in the Western world. That is extremely important and more important than ever at this moment. So the military warfare is just a part of what's going on in the geopolitical conflicts at the moment.
Thank you, Tomas. Thank you for pointing out that, and I think your analysis is very to the point. You want another comment, Louise, please?
Yes, just a quick response. I didn't mean to say that the hybrid war isn't important or that's not what's happening. I'm just saying that there is perhaps a larger part of conventional methods, just like Tomas said, than that many more than what some had expected. It's of course a great part of the hybrid discussion still. Sorry.
Thank you. Very good. We have a question in the chat, but I will bring that forward in a minute or so. First, I would like to just listen in to Kristin and Björn Ola on the same question. And Kristin, you said that among your reflections that also it's not everything from previous crisis we can bring into this crisis. And I think you also mentioned democracy 2.0 to some extent, that we maybe also need to look at the institutions around us. So how do you see this crisis we are into in reflection to the energy transition, please?
I think in the short term, we will really, the countries around us will really focus on getting access to energy, both renewable, but also energy in general. So in the short term, we may experience CO2 emissions increasing because now it's just a matter of actually getting access. In the long term, I think the CO2 emissions will reduce and be maybe faster reduced than otherwise, because I think there will have to be alternatives. So but I think energy protectionism we will experience, and also with that some instability. But also bringing industry home, meaning that you want to be less dependent on other countries. Also for the renewable part, getting access to solar modules or other things from China is difficult right now. So also looking through the supply chains and also really making sure that you get access to energy and that you're self-sufficient. And that may end up with reversing part of the globalization. And what does that mean in a broader context? If we think about one thing is for the Nordic and for Europe, where the standard of living is quite high. In other places, the globalization may end up with, or the reversion may end up with lower export and so on and so forth. So it's really, it's difficult to really see how can we learn from other crises, because they have been more. This is such it's a vast area. It's big, and it's hard to really decomprise and say what actually is. And it's intertwined in so many ways. So it's really not one crisis. It's so many other elements connected together. So that's why I think we really need to look at a broader sense, and also institutions, the way we work, the way we actually trade with others. There's so many other elements that we'll have to look into.
Thank you. Any reflection from you, Björn Ola, on these topics, and then we will go into the chat and look at the questions there.
Very good comments here. So let me just add. I think that there is again something to be learned from the post-war, from the early Cold War era, but where we didn't see protectionism in that way, but rather that you saw blocks or regions collaborating with increased collaboration, but then decreased collaboration between the blocks, and that is what I fear. So in the way that the globalization might be taking a few steps back, it would rather be that we don't see that it's a truly global trade, perhaps, but more in blocks. If we're going that way, we can see, as I said, signs of that. It remains to be seen, and I think EU has a lot to do that to restore the trust in the international system. But that requires not only how we deal with the war on Ukraine, but how we deal with securing resilience and transformation in other parts of the countries. EU's collaboration with South Africa now on decarbonizing the coal industry and so on would be an important example. We'll see what comes out of that. Let me just very quickly say another thing that we can see, though, is that historically, if we are still having our eyes on what we can learn from history, is that we can see that disruptive events throughout history has sometimes led to societal transformation of the scale that we envision with the Green Deal, that it's not only a transformation towards decarbonization, but sustainability at large, where with health, biodiversity, well-being, human security, and so on. And often it comes with the perspective changes that it starts with. I'm a lead author in a chapter from the International Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, precisely on how transformative change. We have 3 years in that work, so it's early days yet. But perception shifts are important. We often focus on the technology changes in transformation, but that often is something that can drive transformation. And then the structural dislocation that comes when ordinary routines of social life are put into doubt, or new power relations existence come to play, and so on. New possibilities that previously were unthinkable are suddenly thinkable and prioritized. And I think that will be the most eminent effect that we've seen, or immediate effect that we've seen from the COVID-19 crisis, but perhaps also with the current crisis. So if we want to be hopeful, we can see some traits of that in the current discussion, in the public discussion.
Thank you. So the time is running very fast for us here. Louise, is that a new hand or an old hand?
Sorry, old hand.
An old hand, very good. So then I will give the last question to Tomas, because can you read the questions in the chat, Tomas?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions on nuclear, both regarding the SMR efforts in some countries, Britain among them, and the thorium reactor possibilities. And I think that technically you can do both small modular reactors and you can make thorium reactors, but the question is, will they ever be able to economically compete with the low-cost renewables now available? And I think the nuclear industry has a lot to prove, not only in theory, but even more so in practice. Regarding small nuclear reactors, small reactors have traditionally been more expensive than big. It's difficult to believe that they will be able to compete, and especially, and that's at this moment in history, that's the most important thing. It will not be fast. It will not be fast enough to meet the needs of the current fossil fuel price crisis, and it will not even be fast enough to meet the needs of the climate crisis. But I think it's welcome that efforts are made to test these technologies. 200 million British pounds for SMR is a lot of money, but in the nuclear industry, it's still very small compared to the cost of one large reactor. So do try, but don't waste too much money trying, but spend some money trying.
Thank you. Björn Ola, it's also one question particular to you. If you would like to just give a 30-second comments on that.
Sure, thanks. I was just responding by text. But yeah, so increased purchasing power is for now the most important form to increase food security in the world. We have enough food as it is now, but in the coming decades, it will be more problematic with climate change. But so increasing the purchasing power in vulnerable countries and the poorer countries that are now at risk for a food crisis is the most immediate action.
Thank you. So then I would just thank all of you for giving your very quick and short and to the point reflections on this topic. I think on a broader context, Haga Initiative, the Climate Leadership Coalition in Finland and Shift in Norway, as individual organizations are all working very closely with academia and researchers. And I think in this systemic transitions we are into, it is so important that business and researchers are working very close together. And so I will just encourage everyone to work closely together, because that is the way we can do this transformation with knowledge, with insights and learn from the past as much as possible. So I encourage you all to continue that collaboration. And with those words, I would just again thank you, all of you. It will be possible to approach each of the panelists here with the comments and questions if you have in the chat, and we will make sure that these questions are responded to. So with that, thank you so much, and back to you, Nina.
Thank you so much, Björn Haugland. And you can stay for a second, Björn, before you disappear. What is your sentence about this panel? How would you summarize it in one sentence?
Well, I would summarize as that the crisis we are into definitely can be a very catalyst to accelerate the transformation. And I think that is the overarching perspective. But we should also be aware that it might have some, negative sides with it. But I think the overarching perspective is that the conflict in Ukraine really can accelerate the transition to a safe, sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Björn K. Haugland, CEO, Skift. Thank you.